Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mindy Rocuant podcast. I'm your host, Mindy Rocuant, and we are doing Esther chapter 2 Bible study today. So let me just pray before we start the study. So God, I ask you to come, give us revelation, give us insight, give us discernment and clarity and understanding of your word, and let it soften our hearts and give us truth and inspiration and truly change our hearts from the inside out. Let it soak in and give us fruit that only you can give us. And I just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So really quickly, I do have my notes to download if you would like to get those. I have that link down below, and also it will subscribe you to my email list. And I always have my books linked below. You can check those out. And so I'm just going to start off by reading Esther 2, and I am reading in the NLT version. So let's read Esther 2. But after Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. So his personal attendants suggested, "Let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, will see that they are all given beauty treatments. After that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti." This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. No idea how to say that. His family had been among those who, with King Jehoiachin of Judah, who had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Haggai's care. Haggai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her and provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids specially chosen from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so. Every day, Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to find out about Esther and what was happening to her. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. That evening she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning she was brought to the second harem where the king's wives lived. There she would be under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai had adopted his younger cousin Esther. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate the occasion, he gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his nobles and officials, declaring a public holiday for the provinces and giving generous gifts to everyone. Even after all the young women had been transferred to the second harem and Mordecai had become a palace official, Esther continued to keep her family background and nationality a secret. She was still following Mordecai's directions, just as she did when she lived in his home. One day, as Mordecai was on duty at the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthana and Teresh, who were guards at the door of the king's private quarters, became angry at King Xerxes and plotted to assassinate him. But Mordecai heard about the plot and gave the information to Queen Esther. She then told the king about it and gave Mordecai credit for the report. When an investigation was made and Mordecai's story was found to be true, the two men were impaled on a sharpened pole. This was all recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign. So the chapter that we just read, it's broken into two sections. The first one is verses 1 through 20, and the second is verses 21 through 23. And the theme of this chapter is the fear of the Lord, which we can see in Proverbs 31 verse 30, which says that charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord will be praised. And then also we see a theme of humility, and the principles that we see is that outward appearance is not what gives you favor, it is your heart. The context of this chapter is the aftermath of banishing the queen. So if you read in verse 1, it says that King Xerxes, his anger had subsided, and he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. So it says that he began thinking, which implied that he hadn't been thinking clearly because he was so full of rage. And that makes total sense because we all know that when we get angry, we tend to stop thinking rationally and we just make emotional decisions, which it seems that that's what happened here. So the Enduring Word commentary says that there was a 4-year span between Vashti and Esther, and that's confirmed when you read Esther 1 verse 3, which says that in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet. And then in chapter 2, verse 16, it says, Esther was taken to King Xerxes in early winter of the 7th year of his reign. So that is true that there was a 4-year span between the two queens. And during that time, that 4-year span, King Xerxes made a massive, unsuccessful invasion of Greece, and he felt defeated and wanted to cheer his heart through sensual diversions. The plan that was presented to King Xerxes, which he approved of, was to assemble a harem from the most beautiful women of the land, a sort of Miss Persia Empire contest. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus says that Xerxes had a total of 400 women selected. And I wanted to look up the word harem because I wasn't sure exactly what it meant. So I looked it up, and it refers to two primary concepts: a private women's quarters in a Muslim household, or a zoological group of one or more males mating with many females. And while that sounds very animalistic, that was the case with King Xerxes. He was literally inviting 400 women, or however many that it actually was. He was inviting all of these women to have sex with him, and whichever one he liked the most would be his queen. And that sounds pretty animalistic to me. So the word harem originates from the Arabic harem, spelled Harim, and it means something forbidden or sanctuary, and we can see the two word meanings reflected in the definitions of the private women's quarters would have been the meaning sanctuary, and then the group of one or more males mating with many females would have been something forbidden. So that makes sense. And so in Muslim and other traditional societies, the harem was the part of the house or palace that was reserved for all of the women, and it provided privacy and served as a secure, secluded area. And in royal courts, the harem was not just a domestic space, but also a significant political entity where influential women vied for power. And we definitely see that with the story of Esther. So we're not given like a ton of details about Esther's history, which I think is intentional because it's clear that this was after the Israelites were deported from Israel because of their sin, and this was their punishment. And so Mordecai and Esther and their families were not exempt from this punishment, so they were part of the deportation that the Babylonians imposed on Judah when it conquered that land. And so they got deported as well, and it seems that in spite of that punishment they were still faithful to God. And it doesn't have any details about how long ago it was. It doesn't say if Esther was born in Persia or if she was born in Israel. We don't know that. But it's clear that they were faithful to God. And it does give some details, like Esther's Jewish name was Hadassah, meaning myrtle, and her Persian name was Esther, meaning star. And she was raised by her cousin Mordecai since the death of her parents. And I had not known why we know Esther as Esther and not Hadassah. I've always wondered about that, but it seems that they were purposely hiding the fact that they were Jewish. So that's why they didn't call her Hadassah, because people would have known that they were Jewish. So that's why they called her Esther. Also, the meaning of Hadassah was myrtle, and so if you read Isaiah 55 verse 13, maybe I'll just flip over to Isaiah. Where once there were thorns, cypress trees will grow. Where nettles grew, myrtles will sprout up. These events will bring great honor to the Lord's name. They will be an everlasting sign of his power and love. So in prophetic symbolism, the myrtle would replace the briars and thorns of the desert, which depicted the Lord's forgiveness and acceptance of his people. So Esther, both of her names were a prophetic symbol of redemption and hope in one of the darkest times for her people. She was literally a star shining in the darkness. And she went through a lot of pain, obviously being in a foreign land, losing her parents. Mordecai was replacing her parents, and it seemed that they had a very solid relationship. And it seems that God was even using the death of her parents because she needed to have that connection with Mordecai later on, which obviously she had no way of knowing. So it's obvious that she was choosing to love and be forgiving and being gracious, and she was just so humble, even from a young age, previously to being chosen to go to the palace. She was choosing to fear God. She had so many reasons to be bitter. Like, can you imagine being forced to go away from your homeland, and then when you are in this foreign country in oppression, having to hide your true identity, and then you lose your parents on top of that, and you have to be raised by your cousin? That's hard. And obviously, Esther went through that pain. She had to go through those really hard things, and she had a choice to make. She could choose to be bitter and angry, or she could choose to be forgiving. And it's obvious that she chose to be forgiving. And it says specifically that she was beautiful and lovely. And it's clear that that was not only outward, she had a beautiful heart. We have no clue how old she was, besides that it does mention that since she was under Mordecai's authority, it seems that she would have been young. I imagine that she was fairly young, and it's possible that she was even still a teenager, but we really can't know for sure. I'm going to paint a picture for you in this next section. So, Haggai, I don't know if it's Haggai or Hegai, he was the king's eunuch, and he could not take advantage of the women since he was a eunuch, which means basically his manhood was literally removed, so he could not, he could not take advantage of the women. So that made him the obvious choice to take care of this whole crowd of women. So right away, Hegai is impressed with Esther, and I was just struck by the picture of, so just picture this environment where you have 400 women. That's a lot of women. And they know that only one of them is going to be chosen as queen. And they're not living in a godly way. They're not trying to be modest or chaste, or they're not trying to have godly virtues. So it would have been a place, most likely, with a lot of chaos and drama, and a lot of power plays, and a lot of attempts to control, a lot of fighting, I imagine, and a lot of drama. And it says that Esther stood out immediately, that immediately Haggai was impressed with her. And I was just struck with that revelation that Esther did not receive special treatment because she was fighting the hardest for it. I imagine that she was actually in the background. She would have been humbly serving others, loving others, listening, and caring about other people. It even says specifically that she did not share about her background, which was what Mordecai had instructed her to do. And so it's clear that she was not going around blabbing about her problems. She wasn't just talking about herself. She was being a servant. And that is what got her favor, not fighting for control. And that is such a lesson for us. And it's clear in the New Testament that that's what we are called to as the church. And it reminds me of Philippians 2, where it talks about how that Jesus, when he came to earth, he was not fighting to be God. He was willing to lay down his right to be God in order to save the world. And that's what he did. And that's the attitude that we are called to. We are called to lay down our lives and to be servants, even to the point of death. And so it's just clear that that's what Esther had. She had that humble position, and she had that servant heart. She had character, and that was how she got noticed. And another thing that was interesting to me as I was studying this was, you know how foreigners are usually very easy to point out? Like, you can usually tell if somebody isn't a native of a specific country because of skin color and cultural differences and language barriers. And even if it's like a second generation, a lot of times you can still notice when somebody hasn't been a native of that country. But it seems that Esther was able to, not that she blended in into the crowd, but that she was able to blend in with her knowledge of the culture, with her knowledge of the language. So it seems that she had been there for quite a long time before that. Like I said before, we don't know if she was born there or not, but it seems that she had a knowledge of the culture and the language and the customs, because otherwise it seems that she would have had to talk about her culture. Like, she was a foreigner there, and it seems that she was able to just be one of the crowd. Like, the thing that got her noticed wasn't her nationality. She even got into the position as queen, and she still didn't tell anybody about her nationality. So all of these women went through a full year of beauty treatments before they were taken to the king. And the Enduring Word commentary says that Persia was one of the many countries famous for its aromatic perfumes and ancient customs for the preparation of brides, including ritualistic baths, plucking of the eyebrows, the painting of hands and feet with henna, facial makeup, and applications of a beautifying paste all over the body meant to lighten the color of the skin and to remove spots and blemishes. And it said also that one reason for the lengthy time of preparation was to tell if the women had been pregnant upon coming into the harem, so that the king would not be charged with fathering a child that was not his. And another aspect of this that I had never known before, or it had not really stood out to me, was that a whole year of spa treatments sounds amazing, but there was only one woman who would win, and then all of these other women would lose, and they would be banished to the harem, where they stayed the wife or the concubine of the king, but rarely, if ever, saw him again, and they were never free to marry another man, and essentially living as perpetual widows. I had never thought of that before, that these women could not move out of that place. They were literally stuck there for life. And so that's just an interesting detail that I had never thought about before. So obviously Esther was very beautiful and her body was very attractive, but something about her heart and her attitude and her spirit gained her favor with the king. And also the fact that she followed Haggai's instructions, that shows that she was humble and she was willing to listen to the advice of others around her. And since Haggai knew the king's preferences, he directed her in the right spot to go, that he knew the king would like whatever he suggested. So God was clearly working in all of this, and he was working to set up Esther in this spot where she would eventually be needed. And it's just interesting that Esther kept such a pure heart in all of this. She didn't let any special treatment go to her head. She didn't think that she was demanding any. She didn't think that she needed special treatment. She was just there to do her duty, and I think that even if she hadn't been chosen as queen, she would have still been a humble servant of God and fearing him. And God gave her so much favor that she ended up being chosen as queen, and the king loved her more than any of the other women. And we don't know if she was the last woman to go through the line. We don't know where she was exactly in the line of women. It could be that, they got through 250 women, and then Esther was chosen, and then the rest of the women would have been banished before even having gone through the king's room. We don't know where all of that happened, the timeline exactly, but God gave her favor, and the king loved her. It says that he loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. So yeah, Esther won. She became queen, and I know that we all already know this story, but it's just so fascinating to really look at it at a deeper level and notice the intricate details of all of these things. And also it says that she continued to be in communication with Mordecai, and it says that Mordecai worked at the king's gate, which was a prophetic picture of Mordecai's influence. He was a protector, and there's even a little story there at the end that shows that he did his duty and actually Queen Esther and Mordecai worked together to save the life of the king, and that story works in their favor later on whole in this whole story. So the Enduring Word Commentary says that this threat of assassination was real, that King Xerxes was eventually murdered by his prime minister, who placed Artaxerxes I on the throne. So this is just setting the stage for this whole thing to play out, and we will have a fun study next time. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing these every single week. I might possibly take a break and talk about something else and then come back to this study later. We will have to see how it works out. But I will definitely be continuing this series, and I hope that you will join me for the next one. And thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed this time together, and have a good week. Bye.